Okay, well, welcome everyone to the session on the Museum of Pandemic Culture, Critical Studies in Student Success, and will be presented by Chris Gildow, Art Faculty and Gallery Director, Tasha Walston, English and Humanities Faculty, and Kathleen Frugé Brown, Art Faculty at Cascadia College. And so now, thank you. I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Hi, everyone. So welcome to our presentation about our Museum of Pandemic Culture. So how this will work today is I'll start by telling you a little bit about what the museum is, how it got started, kinds of things that we like to include in it, and how it led to integrated learning projects across disciplines at our school. And then hopefully it will give everybody here some ideas too. So I'll do that first. I'll start off, and then my colleagues, Chris and Kathy, are going to also chime in, and they're going to show you some of the phenomenal student work that they have received for submission to this project. So the Museum of Pandemic Culture is a public-facing, student-led integrated learning project that we have at Cascadia. And it was started by many faculty, but today only 3 of us will be talking to you about it, but believe that there is a little bevy of people behind the project that aren't included today in our presentation. But my name is Tasha Walston. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm a working writer and activist, and I'm faculty at Cascadia in Humanities and English. And in a little bit, you'll get to meet Chris Gildow, who's a working artist, and he's also the director of the Mobius Art Gallery at our school, which I'll show you in a second, faculty in Humanities and Art. And then Kathy Brown, who is also working artist and faculty in Humanities and Art. So this is us. This is our campus. These are the before times, as you can see. And so here's our building over here where we have our art gallery. And here's what it looks like inside of it when things are actually able to be going on. So of course, right now, we don't have anything in the actual physical building, but we decided to start a virtual museum. So this is the information that you'll see if you go to the museum, that the Museum of Pandemic Culture collects and reflects the energy of 2020 and 2021. It draws on the fears and realities of living through dual pandemics, an unknown virus and well-known systemic racism. Students from Cascadia College share their work in thematic collections that transcend disciplinary fields. So one of the things that we value at Cascadia is interdisciplinarity. So we work together a lot, and it's been one of my true pleasures during this pandemic to be able to collaborate with faculty and students across disciplines. So how did it come to be? Seems so long ago, right? Over a year ago now, I guess, but we were all kind of flung to our own little hidey holes. And I think we were all needing an outlet for self-expression, connection, and collaboration during that time. So I was starting to think through how could we make that happen, now that we're all in this remote modality. And I started thinking about museums that were going remote at the time. And then I thought of the Museum of Pop Culture, which we have in Seattle, which has the cute little nickname of Mopop. And here's the Museum of Pop Culture right here. So you can see we're located in Seattle. Here's the Space Needle and the bizarre building that is the Museum of Pop Culture. And then you can see where we took our nickname from. So we call it Mopan, just like Mopop. So how did it come to be? Well, as I said, museums like the Smithsonian were quickly trying to adapt to virtual life during the pandemic. And so museums were starting to go virtual. Some were more prepared than others for this. So quickly, one of the things that I found out with a Google search was that many of the world's most well-known museums already had ways that you could visit them online within, weeks of the pandemic kicking off, including the British Museum, the Smithsonian, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and so forth. And even now, the Smithsonian is collecting objects from the pandemic, including just now the first known US COVID-19 vaccination effort. So here's somebody's actual vaccination vials and their vaccination card, which I imagine one day will look very, will probably look dated and interesting to us one of these days. So as we were conceiving what a museum might look like for our students, I was thinking about what would be possible without the barriers of our bodies, without money, the barrier of money, having to travel, worrying about crossing borders, bureaucracy, institutions, expertise. Often, talented folks are shut out of things like this because they lack experience or expertise. Time doesn't work the same way now. We don't all have to be in the same place at the same time, and without the confines of space or the restrictions of particular rooms or architecture. So here's, maybe what a typical museum exhibit experience might look like. Things are roped off. There are people standing there looking official, maybe helping you interpret the exhibits. Things are separate from you behind glass or behind ropes. And so all of that, despite us not being in person, is kind of removed in a virtual museum. So in some ways, even though it's more ethereal, it's also a little bit more intimate. But also Black Panther, as it says here. So I also teach in humanities. I teach global studies and cultural studies. And one of the things my global studies students do is watch the film Black Panther. So I don't know if you all have seen that film, but there is a rather notorious museum scene. And it brought up a lot of issues around museums. So as this headline here says, the museum heist scene in Black Panther adds fuel to the debate about African art restitution. So you'll recall the British Museum was one of those museums that had gone virtual. But again, a lot of the objects within the museum were spoils of colonialism in the first place. And so the film Black Panther addresses this. So there's a Wakandan artifact over there behind the glass case. And here we have Eric Killmonger asking, how do you think your ancestors got these? So in addition to the exhibits themselves and the work that students are producing, students in my particular global studies and cultural studies classes are asking questions like, who gets to tell the stories in museums? So which voices are invited or kept out? Who belongs in the museum? How does power show up in museums? And how might it show up in exhibits around COVID-19? What should museums do with objects acquired as treasures of colonialism? And what happens when museums don't need physical space? Does it exacerbate those issues or shove some of them aside or just make it different? So as we're still thinking through how this might look, I started reaching out to other faculty and folks from tech writing, English, cultural studies, global studies, art, sociology, and contemporary Japan. All were ready to throw their hands into this project. It's open to everyone still. It was then and it still is. So we would love to even broaden that to include more fields and disciplines. And then what happened was we ended up starting to think through some themes or exhibits as if these are rooms you could walk into and see artifacts related to these exhibit themes. So the themes that we have come up with so far, and these change actually as the twin pandemics adapt. Those are adaptation, oppression, bodies, space, future, reflection, distraction, isolation, across the globe, and connection. The story of how the process worked was that this museum was created from the ground up by students. So the tech writing students created a needs assessment proposal, which they submitted to the faculty that were organizing the museum. And they asked us questions about what kinds of technological needs did we have? What were our goals for the museum? What kind of exhibits did we think that we would be showing? What kind of hosting needs did we have? What files would we upload? And then those students determined that the best tool for the job, they sort of competed, and then we chose the best proposal. And then we decided through that process that we would use this site called Omeka, and I'll show it to you in a few minutes. So the students in tech writing got to do this really feet on the ground proposal and needs assessment process that they can now talk about and put on their resumes that is for something that's not hypothetical, but it's public facing. So they can link that on their resumes and talk about how they did something meaningful during their time in tech writing and at Cascadia. Then the faculty and students, we worked together to identify those themes and categories that we talked about before. Some faculty incorporated the museum explicitly, like I did with Global Studies 150 and then my humanities classes. But others did not. And so I think you'll hear from Chris and Kathy about how they kind of approached this a little bit differently because of the kinds of courses that they were teaching. Students submitted work to exhibits for my class with descriptions and tags. So they had to learn the elements of exhibits and museums, and they had to create all of their own tags. They had to write a description of their work according to a kind of template, learning the genre conventions and all of that. And then we didn't upload everything that students shared, but we did select work and then upload it. And then in spring 2020, the world erupted in anguished protest after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. So it became clear that MoPan needed to expand its frame once again to include the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and global systemic racism. So the themes, that I showed you earlier, those are a list, that's the current list, but they didn't always look that way. And so we've broadened our frame and included more themes to be able to hold some of the things that were going on as the story continued to unfold. So now in spring of 2021, we're kind of looking at the pandemic through slightly different lenses. We have a confused combination of hope. There are vaccines that are becoming more available, but again, as a global studies person, I have to say they're more available in some places than others. And so that is still creating issues. Fear because there are new strains. But all of this is against the backdrop of conspiracy theories, disinformation, and widening equity gaps, and also decreasing enrollment at our schools. So the student work in MoPan has told a story. It's told the story of all of these things, and it's told it in real time over the last year plus. And so the exhibits and related assignments have changed as well. But one thing that's kind of interesting about it is that we're adapting in real time. So I think a lot of times museums wait to create an exhibit about something until it is in the past, and we can view it through those lenses of time. But we've really been kind of just going along with it and telling the story as it unfolds. So some examples of types of student work that are included in the museum are audiovisual presentations. So you'll see students from contemporary Japan classes and sociology and social sciences classes who talked about, who did research, right? Research-based projects that are here in the form of an audiovisual file that you can play and watch. There's some music, there are posters and infographics, paintings and drawings, photography, sculpture, digital art, poetry, and probably more that I'm forgetting here. So I'll show you a few examples from my students before I turn it over to Chris and Kathy so they can show you some of their students' work. This is from my global studies class. So this was from Seattle, right on Capitol Hill, and a student took this photograph and then they wrote an image tag about it. So there were a lot of things going on here. This is from a student in my cultural studies, humanities 150 class, who this was from, spring 2020 when feelings were heightened around both of the kinds of pandemics that we talked about. This is a student who lost his job because he was a barista and he had to go and do delivery work for Amazon. You can see his Amazon uniform because the coffee shops closed down. And so there was a lot to say here around dynamics of power. This was a presentation about how the postponement of the Olympics impacted Japan from contemporary Japan students. And then you can just play this and they'll do a narration of their project for you. And then here's finally another one from sociology about health inequalities with COVID-19. And then their argument was that COVID-19 disproportionately affects Hispanic and Black Americans. And then they talk a lot about the details of why that is. And I thought that was the last one, but here's one more. This is from an English 102 class at Cascadia. The theme of the class was monsters. So the question that these students were exploring is how do humans respond to real monsters like the coronavirus, and just kind of dealing with the pandemic itself as a monstrous event. So we plan for MoPan to continue. We would love to do a physical exhibit in the art gallery. We're thinking about what that could mean when we're all able to safely be together again. we would like to continue to expand the themes and the frame of the museum. And we got very excited the other day when we were meeting to prepare for today, just thinking through all the possible iterations of the museum and what it could look like. And of course, we want to do more collaboration and more integration. And I'll just quickly, let's see if it lets you see this. Is it letting you see my new tab that's opening? Oh, it didn't take you there. Well, I will actually let Chris and Kathy talk to you a little bit about their students' work. And then if we have time at the end, I'll open up the website so you can actually see what it looks like.
Right. Thank you, Tasha. That's a big context of how we went about putting this museum together and how it operates. So I'm Chris Gildow, and I'm also at Cascadia College in the art department. And Tasha mentioned the hope to get a real, actual art show in the art gallery once we get back on campus, which looks like it might be in the fall. So what I'm going to do is show you all some examples of my students' work. And I hope that that is operating as it should be. Can you see this, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I'm doing is I'm starting last year. And remember too, that Cascadia College is just 2 exits down the freeway from the place where the retirement center and medical center where the first breakout really happened in the United States was down in Kirkland, which is just the next town down from Bothell where our campus is. And so we were literally, at ground zero of the beginning of the pandemic within the United States. And some of our pre-nursing students at the college had gone to that care center and had been working with some of the staff there. Unbeknownst to them, no one had been diagnosed yet, but still it was, so we were right there when it happened. And but let me show you this particular piece here. This is done last spring of 2020, after the campus closed. We were working online. This is a work from a student in my 2D design class. And here she's placed herself right in the bus. And this is under the category of isolation in the Museum of the Pandemic. And what she's done here is, it's a mixed media work of photography and some photoshopping, drawing, collage, a lot of things, text and image, which is what we work with in the 2D design class. But this one in particular is full of isolation. I mean, the drawn figure is isolated by themselves in the middle of the image, but they're also isolated by these yellow bars all around them, right? Sort of keeping them in that space visually. And then isolated again from these faceless people in the background on the other side of the bus window. And then she also integrated text into this piece really well, where you have this quarantine here on the left, but you know where you are, right? Because you're near the Everett Clinic and the Everett Health. So the bus is going right by the hospital. And so all of that combines to give you this compelling image, while the student themselves sits sort of stoically and on the bus alone, although they draw themselves very abstractly in this sort of chaotic use of line. It's really very compelling. And then literally her identity is masked off, right? Where she has collaged the mask over her mouth. And also, like so many of us when we used to ride buses, right, have the headphones on, right? So you isolate yourself even further. So that's collaborating with both text and image. We do a lot of that in Art 110, the 2D design course. Here's another one from a year ago, and this one is just every time I look at this, I just kind of get goosebumps. This is a first-year drawing student who hadn't done work anything like this before this particular piece. Tasha did mention a few moments ago that Kathy and I are teaching studio classes, and so we approach student work that will go into the museum projects a little bit differently than some of the other disciplines. In this case, I started a drawing project called Gone Viral, Your Personal Response to the Pandemic. So it was very specific about what they were to draw about, although what they could draw was a fairly wide net. And in this particular piece, which I just love this work, you know, this figure is I mean, look at the colors enveloping. You don't know who it is, but, you know, sort of by, it could be a collective, could be anyone, right? Could be the student themselves. In any case, they're walking sort of zombie-like, if you will, with their arms out, and in their, you know, what are they thinking about is this free fall. I mean, the free fall of how our lives just went into free fall when the pandemic hit and campuses closed and people were being laid off. And it's just this a whole soup of reasons to free fall. And here she is in her mind, this free fall going on. And what I would like to do just here for a moment, if I can, is to bring up some other works that also show free fall. And let me just bring these up here. Here we go. So unbeknownst to the drawing student with the free falling figure in her head, this here in the center is a drawing by Michael Spafford, who is a artist and faculty member at the University of Washington for years. And here he is in the 1980s drawing this 3-panel piece here called Falling Figures series, somebody else in free fall, right? And then to the right here, we have a drawing by Robert Longo, also from the 1980s, from his series titled Men in Cities. And it was all about this kind of anxiety-ridden generation of young workers in the cities. And here you have this uncanny similarity between my drawing student's figure and Robert Longo's figure of this woman, you know, arched and falling backwards in free fall, her arms out in front of her, sort of contorted in a way that really resonates, you know, through the years and through the different experiences that people have. So I've got a couple more here just to show you. This one in particular, this again was in the fall of this year. So what I want to do is show how these images change over time through the pandemic. This one here, again, in the Art 110 2D design class. This is a gridded, you can see it's a gridded set of images. There's 9 images, starting out with the stock market here during the pandemic. There's another free fall, right, of the stock market itself, although it has rebounded. And then in the middle of all this, we have the germ itself. We have the virus kind of front and center, literally, surrounded by these different kinds of issues that cropped up during the pandemic. Here in the top center, certainly the racial reckoning issues, the death of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, all of these different issues compounded all of our lives. Here at the top right, this is maybe a little more regional for some of you, but this is the murder hornet that seems to have taken a foothold in northwestern tip of Washington state, which isn't far from where we live. So here's the hornet on this wonderful checkerboard background. But that's another threat to us, right? This sort of environmental threat. And then, of course, I mean, you can see these, but a personal issue here of masking up, the germ itself. Here's our political issues over the election. And the down on the bottom row, of course, the burning of the West, right? California, Washington, Oregon. I mean, for the last 3 out of 5 summers, Seattle has been clouded in smoke, which is something very different for all of us. So this, of course, represents the burning of the West and the loss of Kobe Bryant here, sports star. And then lastly, and certainly not least, the working mother who's trying to do her Zoom meeting while holding a child, and the other child is sort of tugging at her for attention, something to eat. I think we can all relate to this at some level. But this is student work, and it just, you never know what's going to come up. I mean, I work with the students on drafts and then their final production, but you really don't know what's going to happen until they upload what they've done. I've got 2 more here. This one now we're moving into, this was done last quarter, winter of 2021, where, I mean, the imagery is still ominous here, right? But it's couched with some sense of irony. And here's the student, of course, isolated in the middle of the drawing in silhouette as a small figure, surrounded by what best I can think of as a hoodie. They weren't really specific about what exactly they're being surrounded by, but it's colorful and it's kind of cool to look at. It's not as threatening as the rest of the drawing. And then reflected quietly in this small pool of water here, but surrounded by, you know, death of the skulls here, the symbol of death, but also by the syringes on the upper left, which are, in this case, symbols of life, right? And success and conquest over the disease itself. And then in the lower left here, you see the stack of TVs or radios, all with the same screen saying consume. So the irony of, in the midst of a deadly pandemic, you're always told to just go out and shop, right? Just go buy something, is so often the message sort of surrounding this. I think back to 2001, when the World Trade Centers were taken down, and President George W. Bush got on the microphone and said, look, you know, please just go shopping, I think is what he told us. So both as a way to kickstart our economy that was in free fall, but also this reminder of our consumerist society. And in the midst of this, the isolation during the pandemic, it's really quite a wonderful drawing. I've got one more to show you, and then Kathy can show you hers. And this one, totally different again. We're looking again at January 2021. This is done by a student in the drawing class who just simply used text and grid as image for the most part. Here, the year the world stopped, January 2020, crossed out 2021. And here, in a calendar grid is the life of the student day by day. Work, closed schools, church is closed, the flights are canceled. She's got a therapy, you know, appointment here on the 18th, quarantine extended. It's just this kind of snapshot of her life in the form of a calendar. And so I kept it because it's so graphic and it tells such a great narrative. Without really a lot of imagery going on. It's mostly text. So quite a change from the start to the finish, but you can see sort of the breadth and of what we get here from student work. So I'm going to hand the ball off to Kathy because she's got some things to show you.
Thanks, Chris, and I will continue the exhibit here. I'm gonna try to share my screen. And do you see a drawing? I can't see any of your faces. So unless I hear somebody saying that you can't see a thing, I'm going to assume you see that drawing. So when the pandemic started and everything moved online, I was really struck by the difference in the subject matter, because when I would give a perspective assignment, I would get a lot of drawings of the interior of the school building, right? But instead I began getting drawings that sort of gave me a view into students' lives. I never really gave MOPAN assignments, but I watched in admiration as I saw students drawing the things that they cared about and painting the things that they cared about. And much of it really seemed to me to give me a window into their, well, into this young woman's bubble. You know, her family's sitting around the table working on a puzzle at night. I also noticed that, and I'm just going to ask, are you seeing a new drawing on the screen here? Is this working?
Yes.
I cannot see.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. I also noticed that suddenly students seem to have a whole lot more time than they had ever had before. So I'd give a texture exercise in the studio, and a student would spend a couple hours on it. I'd give a texture exercise online, and I would get these astonishing answers to the problem that, you know, you look at those little ball bearing beads on the bottom there in this rack, you see a tiny little reflection of the room painted over again in each one. And it is, I think, looking back on these artifacts from the pandemic time, students are really going to remember this sense that their world had shrunk, you know, to something not much bigger than a bedroom. This drawing really makes that feeling very, very alive for me. This is an assignment where they were to take a found image, a vintage photograph or a postcard or something like that, and use their imaginations to expand the world of the image into a much bigger drawing. And I feel that this student really captured that feeling of her shrunken world much better than maybe words could ever do. This is the same assignment, that image extension project. And in this one, the student extended the photo of this beautiful verdant forest to capture the heartbreaking contrast with the burned thousands of acres that it was in the news, it was in our nostrils, really, out here in the Pacific Northwest all last summer. I was just struck over and over by how much students wanted to express their feelings about current events in their artwork. And I think these are many of the things that we are going to think about when we look back at 2020 and 2021. This student was answering a graphic design assignment, a really standard assignment that I have given many times, to take 5 words and 5 dots and 5 circles and 5 triangles and 5 rectangles and make 5 rough drafts and then produce a final piece in Illustrator. And this is under the spaces category in MOPAN. She was inspired by the road trip that she and her best friend had planned to take through the deserts of Arizona in the summer of 2020, but couldn't because of COVID. So instead, she listens to Canyon Moon by Harry Styles, which she explains in her statement in MOPAN. This one is also in spaces. I got many self-portraits out of doors in lonely outdoor spaces where the one place you didn't have to wear a mask when you were outside. And this is an especially stunning one, I think. And again, in this one, this painting student created this beautiful Eden-like garden space. And then you see that the figure in it is wearing a mask, and it's a very eerie shock that I think will always remind us of these times. Lots and lots of artwork about masks, of course, or featuring masks from very, very painterly, expressionistic types of approaches like this to my graphic design students always do a typographical self-portrait. And in this one, this student gave himself a mask of words. I'm going through these pretty quickly because I have a time limit, and I thought it would be fun to show you quite a few of these drawings. So this one I just love. The self-portrait is masked, and the student depicts herself in the act of putting her very first voting ballot in a ballot box last November. I added this piece to Mopan under the future category. This is one of my favorite images, and I'm just going to read the statement that the artist wrote here. This was painted with both the pandemic and the protests in mind. It is important to remember that racism has existed for centuries and that it was bound to boil over. With the pandemic causing millions of people to lose their jobs and stay home, people were already getting antsy. George Floyd was the tipping point. The world was long overdue for change. People just needed to realize it. And I just, I'm so floored with this young artist's ability to capture so many aspects of what this last year has felt like in one very compelling image. Many of my students created work around Black Lives Matter, social justice issues, and questions of identity. And here's the artist's statement on this one. I thought I would center my focus on the Black trans people that have been killed by the police this year. I hope it opens people's eyes and makes them reflect. Very powerful use of the students' art skills. For the typographical self-portraits that my students typically create in graphic design, they need to generate a lot of text. And one thing that I learned about this year was the I Am From poem, based on a poem by George Ella Lyon called Where I'm From. This has become a sort of a well-used exercise that a lot of teachers are using to raise questions of identity with their students. And the poem on the right, this is actually an excerpt from the poem this young man wrote to generate the text that creates his torso, the image of his torso in the slide. I'll read this one since it's so short. I am from my mother's beautiful country, Nicaragua, where the heat beats down on your skin, giving you a sun-kissed tan. Managua, a city of beautiful people and a place I call home. I miss the days where I took the taxi to go to the market with my family and saw people who looked like me. And that's the self-portrait that she created, exploring these themes of her identity. It has been a tough year, but I think as educators, we all know that it's been especially tough on young people. Many of my students have told me that making art has been a positive and healthy and healing outlet for the stress, the anxiety, the loneliness, the mental health challenges that we have all faced, but which I think have been harder on our students than anyone. And I will just end with this last image, which is the one that found its way into our splash page, no pun intended, for Mopan. Kind of sums up a feeling that many of us will have, I think, as we look back at this year. We have time for questions now, so if there are any from our listeners, or if we have any in chat.
And I don't know about my co-presenters, but I'm happy to have more of a conversation too. If you just have thoughts bubbling up that aren't exactly questions either, we're wide open. I'll paste a link to the museum in the chat, which maybe if you could hold off and look at it a little bit later after we've finished chatting, but it'll be there for you if you'd like.
I see a compliment to our students' artwork in the, in the chat. I have been so grateful this year for the commitment of my students. It has been really.
Can I ask a
really
question?
awe-inspiring. Yes.
Can you hear me all right? Yeah, okay. I can't, for some reason, I can't hear you on my headphones. I wanted to ask about the challenges of creating art or teaching art during this time. Kathy, you and we occupy the same floor at the same college, so I get to talk to you about it. But I wonder, if you can reflect on that a little bit, because the work that you displayed is extraordinary, and I have nothing to compare it to because I think your students' work is always amazing. But you talk about the fact that they, found it to be a very restorative activity, but it must have been very difficult to teach art during a pandemic. If either of you want to speak to that.
It didn't turn out to be impossible. That's what I had thought it would be. But Chris, why don't you take it?
Yeah, okay. I see it at two levels, Anne. One is technical, where we're teaching studio courses online, so you're never really there. You're just on this flat screen. And photography plays a big role in teaching because you have to take photos of either photos or videos of your demonstration bits, and then the students upload photographs of their work. So everything's sort of once removed from the actual image, right, or artifact or piece or drawing. And then the other part is to get the students to buy into the online modality. Our classes are full normally and they work pretty well, but students can come and go from it, either because of jobs or family. Or I had a student today that couldn't come to class because she just got her second vaccine and she's having a reaction to it. So all of these are added barriers to teaching online. But between Kathy and I, we have another colleague in the art department, Kolia, who we work together to begin with to try to figure out best practices and best ways to approach online learning. And we built from that over the last year. And we're getting, well, as you can see, we're getting pretty good results.
I wonder if there are any other art faculty here, because I think this museum presentation might be more of interest to visual arts faculty. If anybody has anything they'd like to add to what Chris said, be interesting to hear.
I'm not art faculty, but I was going to add that another thing that we've been thinking about as I've attended more and more virtual conferences is how this interdisciplinarity and this integrated learning could move not just from within one school, but throughout multiple schools. So are there ways that we could collaborate across institutions and disciplines? And so I think doing this project has really opened my thinking to lots of different possibilities. And it's really exciting to think about what could be possible. Right, a traveling exhibit. There's nowhere to go right now, but yeah, I think it would be really interesting to get, I can think of a lot of possibilities, and I'd love to see more STEM exhibits, work with statistics, just, even more collaboration would be fantastic.
There's nowhere to go, but at the same time, you can go anywhere. Some of my students have been taking my class from I've had one in China, one in Taiwan, and it's it's pretty amazing, really.
Any other thoughts, comments, or questions that folks might have? We're pretty open here. Oh, that's an interesting question from a name I recognize. Yeah, so I haven't included the assignment prompts in the museum, but that is a fascinating thought exercise that I'm like speeding through right now in my head, that if people other than students were to submit things, these assignments already date themselves. Each quarter I look back at the one from last quarter and I think we're in a completely different situation now. Like the story of the pandemic has changed, right? And all the emphasis on masks and the questions students were asking at the beginning are very different than the ones that they're thinking about now. And so it would be interesting to use those as artifacts, I think. Yeah, it is very interesting, I think, to see how they've explored different parts of the experience, and to even see how, for example, the art from Kathy's students is similar to and different to the art that Chris's students produce. And even the art from my students in global studies and humanities generally is pretty fascinating.
I want to add one more thing here, that I'm going to discontinue the Gone Viral personal response to the pandemic project for my students. We're not going to do it this quarter because we're going to do other projects that we can upload to the museum itself. The museum will keep going. As Tasha and Kathy said, things change, right, over time. And so we'll be uploading new kinds of works. But this, my discontinuing that project is part of in line with this light maybe at the end of the tunnel, where we may be able to crawl out of this by the end of the year and become somewhat normal again. So I will create other projects, drawing and design projects for students. There is an integrated learning project that I just did last quarter between the poetry writing class at Cascadia and my drawing class, and they did some ekphrastic work. My students drew, it did not illustrate the poems they got from the poetry students, but they responded to them. So integrated learning projects like that will find its way into the museum too. And I know it's just about time here. Our time is just about up, but I do want to thank everyone for attending and seeing and listening to our presentation today.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
For spending your Zoom energy on our little bit here. I guess there's a session survey to complete, and I did put in the chat my email address if anyone else wants to talk more about the project or how you could get something similar off the ground at your school.
Okay, well, it looks like we're about wrapped up. Is it okay with you all if I go ahead and stop the recording?
I think we're done. Yes. Yes.
All right, well, thank you all, and I'll stop the recording and then I'll end the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.